So this first bit here is essentially just a hand drawing using Paintbrush and Illustrator over a shoe and a pen and tablet. Once I've got the basic look down, I then go over it again and connect all the lines to make sure that they're all tight. I repeated this with 3 different shoe designs, and I imported them all into Photoshop, resized, copy and pasted, and messed with the layers to create a collage type effect, as can be seen by the final image here. Now this effect is slightly different. What makes this different to the first one, though very similar, is that it keeps in mind three-dimensional principles essentially. So as you can see, like where the jeans wrap around his ankle, and those are the main differences, and as well as the fact that it's going to sit on top of him, and the legs of the person, that is. This is further researched early on in my printed folio, by the way. Now here I tried to come up with a sort of shadowy effect on the creases, but it just didn't look very good, so I ended up going back over it, just essentially accenting with black lines. So I repeated that with 2 other shoes, and that's how it looks in context of the magazine. Now this effect here is it's actually very simple to do when it makes sense. That's the main thing. I'm just coming up with the page dimensions there, by the way. So essentially it just creates a 3-dimensional illusion through bringing parts of the first image over the second. So the whole thing is that his head is through, but then the base of his body is behind. Now the key thing here is bringing it into Lightroom and editing it all together. The main reason behind this is because in Lightroom, all the adjustments made to the image will be made over the Photoshop editions and the original image, which blends it together to give it a cleaner look. Now, this technique here is called Bezier curving, and I'm doing this in Photoshop at the moment. And this is a little bit temperamental, and honestly, it's just patience, I'd say, with this tool. And the amount of time you spend and the amount of precision you put into the cut will pretty much reflect the quality of the cut itself. I tried to stay between 1 to 2 pixels of the high contrast edge, and then I put a feather of about 1 to 2 pixels depending on the image. And that's how it looks in context of the magazine, the final image. Now this sort of polka dot type punchy pop art type look was something which I saw online. It's not really what I usually do, but yeah, it came out nice. Essentially what I'm doing there is I'm just trying to find a palette online to give me a starting point. The key thing with this look to sort of achieve it was making sure that I had harsh lines and, importantly, the font pairing. So as you can see, this font is a very intense block straight cut font. So that was quite important to keep up with that sort of minimal but very intense color aesthetic at the same time. And how essentially these are stuck all together is just is quite simple. It's just drawing lines, but the key thing is making sure that the layers are in the right places, because although while you make it you may not notice, if any of those layers are sort of out of line, it's going to be very noticeable in the printed version when a color overlaps one of the black lines, etc. This image here on the bottom right is actually one of mine as well, and that's also further explained in the printed folio. I did this effect again with the second page, and this is essentially what it looked like in the end. And that's the second page there. Yeah, I think it came out quite neat. Now, this is for the Japan article in the card section of the magazine. I wanted to, because it's relevant to about like that whole retro look. This is Bezier curving again, by the way. I found these sort of old graphic designs of Japanese ads and Japanese products and things like that, and essentially wanted to create a collage-y type effect. I'll just fast forward here. Now I put them all together, messed around with the sizes, but what I did differently here with this car is I erased that trail back around the lady in the middle so it looks like it's wrapping around, which is just a neat little creative idea that came to my mind as I was producing it. Now the sun I found a bit too intense, so there is an image of old paper clipping masked in at about 50% opacity. Then add the titles, and I've added those waves, as you can see in the background, just more Japanese icons. And I import this all into Lightroom again and edit a black and white toned look so it's not as intense. Now onto the video. This is just a comparison of the studio audio, which I was fortunate enough to get because they recorded on the PA, and then the straight out of the camera audio. Yeah, as you can see, it just doesn't have that clarity or depth. So I wouldn't have been able to do the end scene without this much stronger audio here, which I was fortunate enough to get from the gig. Now, the reason why all the footage is actually from the background is I did actually have shots from the front. However, due to a mishap with cards, it was formatted over. But honestly, it ended up being fine due to where the film went and how I ended up joining the band on various trips. Now, this is in the printed portfolio. This is under keyframing, except I've added this to the video so it demonstrates how the values actually change with the keyframes. So you'll notice that the second that it hits that dot there on the corner and those colors come in, it's because the saturation's climbing up, and that's how it comes in there. Now, this section here is explaining the, again, this is in the printed folio. However, what this is here is explaining how the opacities work. So if you see those graphs, essentially it's similar to the keyframes, but when it's right at the bottom, the opacity is at 0. When it's up the top, it's 100. So it fluctuates between the layers, and that's essentially how you get that sort of double exposure look. And those are the layers as well to the end scene there. That will conclude my portfolio video. I hope you enjoyed.